Romantic billionaire cries when the janitor leaves, never to return, and leaves an object with her. The Pacific wind carried salt and memories across the Malibu shoreline as Celeste Davenport watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Her royal blue blazer hung perfectly over denim shorts, her fine blue shoes sinking slightly into the sand as she walked along the water's edge. At 24, she commanded a hotel empire worth hundreds of millions, yet she couldn't command her own heart to forget. Her fingers instinctively reached for the gold chain around her neck, delicate, simple, utterly out of place against her designer wardrobe. 3 years, 3 long years, since Ryan Walker had placed it in her palm, his calloused fingers trembling as he whispered, "This was my mother's, it's all I have left of her, I want you to have it." She'd begged him not to go, offered him everything, a management position, a partnership. Her heart laid bare on the marble floor of the Melbrook Hotel's grand lobby. But Ryan had smiled that sad, beautiful smile and shaken his head. "I can't be your project, Celeste," he'd said, his blue uniform still smelling faintly of cleaning solution and motor oil. "I can't be the working-class romance that makes you feel alive. I need to find my own path, somewhere far from here." The memory still cut like glass. Celeste paused as a wave rushed over her feet, the cold water a sharp contrast to the warm evening air. She'd been 21 then, fresh from a bitter divorce with Marcus Harrington III, her father's chosen successor for both the family business and her bed. The marriage had lasted 18 months. 18 months of champagne at charity galas and silence in their penthouse bedroom. When she'd finally signed the divorce papers, her father had called her a fool. "Harringtons and Davenports built this coast together," he'd shouted. "You threw away a dynasty for what? Your feelings?" But feelings were all she'd had left by then. Feelings in the Melbrook Hotel, the crown jewel her late grandmother had left specifically to her, bypassing her father entirely. At 21, she'd become one of the youngest female hotel magnates in California. At 21, she'd also become completely, utterly alone. Until Ryan. She smiled despite the ache in her chest. Ryan Walker, 28 years old, janitor by day and motorcycle mechanic by night. She'd first noticed him on a Tuesday morning 6 months after her divorce. She'd been walking through the hotel's service corridors, something her father said was beneath her, when she'd heard someone singing in Spanish. Badly. Following the sound, she'd found him on his hands and knees, scrubbing the marble floor near the kitchen entrance. His blue uniform was spotless despite the work, his yellow gloves moving in efficient circles. But it was his face that stopped her. Concentration mixed with contentment, as if cleaning floors was exactly where he wanted to be. "That's a beautiful song," she'd lied. His singing was terrible. He'd looked up, startled, and nearly knocked over his bucket. Recognition had flickered across his features. The boss's daughter, the owner herself. But instead of the usual deference she received, he'd just laughed. "You're either very kind or very deaf, Miss Davenport," he'd said, his voice warm with humor. "My mother always said I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket." Looks like she was right. Something in her chest had cracked open at that moment. When was the last time someone had been real with her? "Call me Celeste," she'd said, surprising herself. "And what's your name?" "Ryan Walker, ma'am, 3 months on the job." He'd pulled off one glove to shake her hand, then seemed to think better of it, looking at his cleaning damp palm. "Actually, maybe we'll save the handshake for when I'm not elbow deep in floor polish." She'd laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. That had been the beginning. She'd found herself looking for him after that. Not obviously. She still had her pride, her position to maintain. But she'd take different routes through the hotel, happen to pass by areas where she knew he'd be working. The pool deck at dawn, the kitchen corridors during the afternoon lull, the rooftop garden in the evening. Each time they'd talked a bit more. She learned he started his shifts at 5 in the morning, preferring the quiet hours when the hotel slept, that he brought his lunch in a worn backpack his mother had given him, that he read philosophy books during his breaks, Marcus Aurelius mostly. "Stoicism helps when you're on your knees scrubbing other people's floors," he'd explained with a self-deprecating smile. "And does it work?" she'd asked. "Some days better than others, but it helps me remember that dignity comes from within, not from what you do or how much money you make. My mother taught me that before she died." The mention of his mother had been casual, but Celeste had seen the flash of pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be sorry. Be grateful you had people who loved you." He'd paused, studying her face. "You did have that, didn't you?" The question had caught her off guard. Had she? Her mother had died when she was 8, a vague memory of expensive perfume and distant affection. Her father loved her in his way, but it was a transactional love, proud when she succeeded, disappointed when she failed to meet his standards. Her ex-husband had loved her name and her connections, never her. "I don't know," she'd admitted, and the honesty had felt dangerous and liberating all at once. Ryan had looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and Celeste had felt seen in a way she never had before. Not as Charles Davenport's daughter, not as Marcus Harrington's ex-wife, not as the young CEO of Melbrook Hotel, just as Celeste, a woman who wasn't sure if she'd ever been truly loved. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all week," Ryan had said quietly, "and I work with a guy whose kid is in the hospital with leukemia." The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it had made her want to know him more. Their friendship had deepened gradually, like layers of paint building to create a complete picture. She'd learned about his dreams, not just the motorcycle shop, but bigger dreams too. He wanted to teach underprivileged kids how to work with their hands, how to find dignity in manual labor. He wanted to prove that success didn't require a college degree or family connections, just determination and skill. "You sound like you're fighting a war," Celeste had observed one evening, finding him cleaning the hotel gym after hours. "Maybe I am." Ryan had straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with his blue sleeve. "Every day I'm here, people look through me like I'm invisible. The guests, the other staff, even some of the managers. I'm just the janitor, the guy who cleans up other people's messes. But you know what? I show up on time every day. I do my job well. I treat people with respect. And somehow that's still not enough for most people to see me as having value." "I see your value," Celeste had said softly. His eyes had met hers, intense and searching. "Do you? Or do you see a project? A social experiment? Look at me, befriending the help. Aren't I progressive?" The accusation had stung because there was truth in it. At first, maybe she had been curious about him precisely because he was different from everyone else in her world, but that had changed. At first, maybe that's what it was, she'd admitted, but not anymore. Now I see someone who challenges me to think differently. Someone who's genuine in a world full of people wearing masks. Someone who's building something meaningful instead of inheriting it. And yes, someone who makes me laugh when I haven't felt like laughing in a very long time. Ryan had studied her face, as if trying to determine her sincerity. Then he'd smiled. That slow, devastating smile that made her heart skip. "You're either the most honest person I've ever met or the best liar. Which do you think?" "I think I'm hoping for the first one." That night had marked a shift in their relationship. The conversations had become deeper, more personal. He'd told her about growing up poor in Santa Monica, about his mother working 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed, about winning a scholarship to UCLA only to drop out when his mother got sick, about the guilt of leaving school mixed with the certainty that he'd made the right choice. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd stayed?" Celeste had asked. "Every day. But then I remember the last 6 months with my mom, the conversations we had, the laughter, even when she was dying, the way she held my hand and told me she was proud of the man I'd become. If I'd stayed at UCLA, I would have missed all of that. I would have gotten a degree but lost the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. So no, I don't regret it. I just wish the world didn't judge me for it." Celeste had wanted to tell him she didn't judge him, but she knew that wasn't entirely true. Her first instinct when she'd learned he was a college dropout had been exactly what he feared. Disappointment, a subtle diminishing of his worth in her mental calculations. She'd had to actively fight against those ingrained prejudices, and even now, sometimes they surfaced without warning. "I'm trying not to judge you by those standards," she'd said, instead choosing honesty. "But I was raised in a world where education and pedigree matter more than character. It's hard to completely unlearn that." "At least you're honest about it," Ryan had said. "That's more than most people manage." She'd started visiting his workshop after that conversation, drawn by a need to understand his world better. The first time she'd shown up at his garage apartment, he'd been surprised, but not unwelcoming. "Fair warning," he'd said, leading her to the small garage behind his building. "It's not fancy. It's not even particularly clean by your standards." But when he'd opened the garage door, Celeste had been struck not by the messiness, but by the organization of it. Every tool had its place. Parts were labeled and sorted. His blue Harley-Davidson sat in the center like a jewel, polished and cared for with obvious devotion. "This is where the magic happens," Ryan had said, a hint of pride in his voice. 3 nights a week and every Saturday I work on bikes here, building my skills, building my reputation, building toward the shop I want to own." Celeste had walked around the space genuinely fascinated. "How did you learn all this?" "YouTube mostly. And trial and error. Lots of error." He'd laughed. "I destroyed 2 engines before I figured out what I was doing. But that's the thing about working with your hands. You learn by doing. You can read all the manuals in the world, but until you actually take an engine apart and put it back together, you don't really understand it. Teach me, she'd said impulsively. Ryan had looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. Teach you to work on motorcycles? Why not? You said yourself it's about doing, not just reading, so let me do. He'd been skeptical at first, probably thinking she'd lose interest after getting her hands dirty. But Celeste had surprised him, and herself. There was something deeply satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again, about understanding how pieces fit together to create something functional and beautiful. Over the following weeks, she'd learned about carburetors and spark plugs, about the difference between two-stroke and four-stroke engines, about the careful balance required to tune a motorcycle properly. She'd gotten grease under her fingernails and oil stains on her designer jeans, and she hadn't cared. You're a natural, Ryan had admitted one Saturday afternoon, watching her successfully reassemble a transmission she'd taken apart earlier. Most people would have given up by now. Most people don't have your patience as a teacher, Celeste had countered. You explain things in ways that make sense. You don't talk down to me because I don't know the terminology. That's because I remember being the one who didn't know anything, Ryan had said. I remember how frustrating it was when people would use jargon and act superior about their knowledge. I swore if I ever got good at this, I'd teach others the way I wish someone had taught me. It was moments like that when Celeste fell a little more in love with him. Not the big dramatic gestures, but the small revelations of character. The way he treated everyone with respect, from the hotel's owners to the delivery drivers who brought parts to his garage. The way he spoke about his mother with such tenderness 3 years after her death. The way he looked at his Harley not as a possession, but as a connection to the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. Why a Harley specifically? She'd asked one evening, watching him polish the chrome. Because it was the most expensive thing my mother ever bought. She saved for 3 years, putting away $10 here, $20 there from her tips. She didn't tell me what she was saving for. Then on my 25th birthday, she brought me here to this garage. I was renting just the space then, not the apartment, and there it was. Blue as the ocean, she said. Every man needs something that makes him feel free, mijo, she told me. The world will try to put you in boxes, tell you what you can and can't do based on where you come from. But on this bike, you're just a man, and the open road. Nobody can take that from you. Ryan's voice had gone rough with emotion. She died 6 months later. Sometimes I think she knew. That she knew she was dying and wanted to give me something that would help me feel free when she was gone. Celeste had moved closer, putting her hand on his shoulder. She sounds like she was an amazing woman. She was the best person I've ever known, Ryan had said simply. Everything good in me comes from her. Everything. That was when she'd first seen the necklace. He'd been wearing it under his shirt, but as he'd leaned over to adjust something on the motorcycle, it had slipped out. A delicate gold chain with a tiny bird pendant. That's beautiful, Celeste had said, reaching out to touch it before she'd thought better of the intimacy of the gesture. Ryan had looked down at the necklace, then back at her. It was my mother's. Her mother's before that. It's supposed to bring the wearer to their freedom, or so the family story goes. My mother gave it to me right before she died, told me to wear it until I found what I was looking for. And have you found what you're looking for? He'd looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable and terrified in his eyes. I think I might have, he'd said softly, but I don't know if I'm allowed to want it. The moment had stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Celeste had made a choice. She'd leaned in and kissed him, gentle and questioning. Ryan had pulled back immediately, shock and longing warring on his face. Celeste, we can't. Why not? Because you're you and I'm me. Because this can't go anywhere good. Because... She'd kissed him again, more insistent this time, and after a moment of resistance he'd kissed her back. His hands had been gentle on her face, trembling slightly, as if she were something precious and fragile that might break. When they'd pulled apart, both breathing hard, reality had crashed back in. This is a mistake, Ryan had said, but his thumb was stroking her cheekbone in a way that contradicted his words. Then let's make it together, Celeste had whispered. That night had changed everything. They'd talked for hours, sitting on the concrete floor of his garage with their backs against his Harley, about what this meant, about the impossibility of it, about wanting it anyway. I'm not good for you, Ryan had said, his voice heavy. I have nothing to offer you except myself, and that's not enough. You deserve someone who can match you, someone who can walk into those fancy galas and know which fork to use, someone your father won't hate on sight. I don't want someone my father approves of, Celeste had said fiercely. I already did that. I married the perfect man on paper, and it was the loneliest 18 months of my life. Marcus knew every fork, every wine, every social grace. And he was empty inside. You have more substance in your little finger than he had in his entire body. Substance doesn't pay the bills or earn respect in your world. Then maybe it's not my world. The words had surprised her even as she'd said them. Maybe I don't want that world. Maybe I want to build something different. Ryan had looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You don't know what you're saying. You've never lived without money, without status, without the safety net of your family name. It's easy to romanticize poverty when you've never experienced it. I'm not romanticizing anything, Celeste had argued. I'm saying I'd rather have something real with you than something fake with anyone else. I'm saying I'm tired of living for other people's expectations. I'm saying I want to choose my own life. And what if you choose me and regret it? What if we try this and 6 months from now you wake up and realize what you've given up? What if... She'd kissed him again, cutting off his spiral of doubts. Then we deal with it. Together. But I'd rather take that risk than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. They'd agreed to keep it quiet at first. Not because Celeste was ashamed, but because they both needed time to figure out what this was before the world tried to tear it apart. So for 6 months, they'd existed in a bubble, She'd come to his garage in the evenings and he'd teach her about motorcycles. They'd ride up the coast on weekends, finding hidden beaches in small towns where no one knew the Davenport name. They'd talk about everything: philosophy, dreams, childhood wounds, hopes for the future. If you could do anything, Celeste had asked one sunny Saturday, lying on a beach blanket while Ryan worked on his Harley nearby. Anything at all, without worrying about money or practicality, what would you do? Ryan had paused, wrench in hand, really considering the question. I'd open a school. Not a regular school, but a place where kids who don't fit the traditional academic mold could learn real skills. Mechanics, carpentry, welding, trades that matter, that build things. I'd show them that success doesn't have to look like college and a desk job, that there's honor and dignity in working with your hands. That's beautiful, Celeste had said softly. It's a pipe dream, Ryan had corrected. Do you know how much it costs to start something like that? The space, the equipment, the insurance? I'd need hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hell, maybe millions. It's never going to happen. Maybe not tomorrow, Celeste had said, an idea forming in her mind. But someday. Why not? Ryan had laughed, but it had sounded bitter. Because people like me don't get to have someday dreams, Celeste. We get to have right now survival. I'm saving for a motorcycle shop, and even that feels impossibly far away most days. She'd wanted to offer him money, wanted to write a check and make his dreams real. But she'd known instinctively that he'd refuse, that he'd see it as charity, as proof that he needed her wealth more than her. So she'd kept quiet, but the idea had stayed with her. What if she could help him without him knowing? What if she could find a way to make his dreams possible, while letting him believe he'd done it himself? But before she could figure out how, everything had fallen apart. Her father had found out about them in the worst possible way. He'd come to the hotel unexpectedly one evening looking for Celeste. She'd told her assistant she'd be in her office, but instead she'd been down in the service corridors with Ryan, laughing about something silly while he finished his shift. Charles Davenport had appeared around a corner like an avenging angel, his face purple with rage. My office. Now, he'd said to Celeste, not even acknowledging Ryan's existence. Dad, Now, Celeste. She'd looked at Ryan, whose face had gone carefully blank. The look of a man used to being dismissed, to being less than. She'd hated seeing that look directed at her father's retreating back. I'll call you later, she'd whispered. Don't, Ryan had said quietly. This is what I've been afraid of. Let him say what he needs to say. Then we'll figure out what to do. But what her father had said, screamed, really, had been worse than anything Celeste could have imagined. Have you lost your mind? Charles had raged, pacing his office like a caged animal. The janitor? The goddamn janitor? Do you have any idea what people will say, what the board will think, what this will do to our family's reputation? His name is Ryan, Celeste had said, forcing her voice to stay calm. And yes, he works as a janitor. He also has more integrity in his little finger than most of the men on your precious board. Integrity doesn't matter when it comes with social embarrassment. Charles had slammed his hand on the desk. I didn't raise you to throw away everything we've built for some working-class fantasy. This isn't a movie, Celeste. This is real life, and real life has consequences. I'm aware of that, Dad, but I'm also an adult. I own this hotel. You can't control who I see. Can't I? Her father's smile had been cruel. You may own the hotel thanks to your grandmother's sentimental will, but I still have significant influence. I can make things very difficult for your friend. Very difficult indeed. The threat had been clear. And that night, Charles had made good on it. He'd called Ryan to his office. Celeste had only found out later what had been said, piecing it together from Ryan's broken explanation and her father's smug satisfaction. Charles had offered Ryan $200,000 to disappear. When Ryan had refused, angrily, profanely refused, Charles had changed tactics. He'd pointed out the futility of their relationship, the inevitable resentment, the impossibility of truly bridging their different worlds. "She'll wake up one day," Charles had told Ryan, "and realize she's given up her entire world for you, and you'll see it in her eyes, that flash of regret, that wondering what if. Can you live with that? Can you wake up every day knowing you're the reason Celeste Davenport threw away her birthright?" Ryan had come to Celeste that night, devastation written across every line of his face. "I'm leaving," he'd said without preamble. "Tomorrow. I've got a job offer in Seattle. Good pay, benefits, a chance to start fresh." Seattle? Celeste's world had tilted. "Ryan, no. We can fight this. Together. We can fight what, exactly? The reality of who we are? Your father's right, Celeste. Eventually you'd wake up and regret choosing me. Eventually this romantic notion of love conquering all would crash against the reality of paying bills and managing expectations and living in two different worlds. You don't get to decide that for me," Celeste had said, fury and desperation mixing in her voice. "You don't get to decide what I'm willing to sacrifice. Someone has to think clearly," Ryan had shot back, his own frustration showing. "Someone has to see past the fairy tale to the reality. I love you. God, I love you so much it's killing me. But I love you enough to not destroy your life. And I love myself enough to not spend the rest of mine feeling like I'm not enough." They'd fought for hours. She'd begged, argued, threatened, pleaded. But Ryan had been immovable. He'd made up his mind, and nothing she said would change it. Finally, as dawn broke over the ocean, Ryan had reached up and unclasped his mother's necklace. "I want you to have this," he'd said, his voice breaking. "No." Celeste had stepped back, shaking her head. "No, Ryan, I can't take that. It's your mother's. It's all you have left of her. That's exactly why I want you to have it." He'd moved closer, gently taking her hand and placing the necklace in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "My mother told me this would bring me to my freedom. But my freedom isn't out there in Seattle, Celeste. It's here, with you. And since I can't have it, since I'm too scared and too proud and too aware of reality to keep it, I want you to have this piece of her, this piece of me." His hands had been shaking as he'd clasped the chain around her neck. "Wear this, and remember that someone saw you, really saw you. Not the CEO, not the heiress, not the Davenport name, just Celeste. The woman who laughed at my terrible singing and got grease under her fingernails and learned to ride a motorcycle like she was born to it. The woman I fell in love with despite knowing better." Celeste had been crying, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "Don't do this. Please don't do this. I have to," Ryan had whispered, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that broke her heart completely. "For both of us, I have to." He'd walked out of her life that morning, leaving her standing in her penthouse with his mother's necklace around her neck and tears streaming down her face. The months after Ryan left had been the darkest of Celeste's life. She'd thrown herself into work with a manic energy that worried her staff. She'd expanded the hotel, bought new properties, increased profits, all while feeling completely empty inside. She'd tried dating, men from appropriate families with appropriate pedigrees. They'd been handsome, successful, perfectly suitable, and she'd felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. "You're comparing them all to him," her best friend Monica had observed over drinks one night, 6 months after Ryan's departure. "You're measuring every man against a janitor you dated for 6 months. He wasn't just a janitor," Celeste had said quietly, touching the necklace she never took off. "He was the only person who ever made me feel seen, the only person who challenged me to be better, the only person who loved me despite my flaws, not because of my bank account. Then why did you let him go?" "I didn't let him go. He left." "Did he? Or did you both give up too easily?" The question had haunted Celeste. Had they given up? Ryan had left, yes, but she'd let him. She'd made one attempt to fight for them, then accepted his decision. She'd been 21, scared, overwhelmed by her father's disapproval and the impossibility of it all. But she was 24 now. She owned her own hotel empire. She'd proven she could succeed in business. She'd proven she didn't need her father's approval, or anyone else's. What she needed was Ryan, and she'd spent 3 years regretting that she'd never fought harder for him. 3 years wondering what if. 3 years wearing his mother's necklace like a talisman, a reminder of the only time in her life she'd felt truly, completely alive. which brought her back to this moment. This impossible, miraculous moment on a Malibu beach where the man she'd never stopped loving stood 5 feet away, staring at her like she was a ghost. Time seemed to slow as they looked at each other. 3 years of longing and regret and unspoken words hanging between them like morning fog. Over the following weeks, she'd found excuses to walk through the service areas. Ryan was always there. Early morning shifts, late night cleanups, working double shifts to save money for something he never quite explained. They'd started talking. Small conversations at first. The weather, how his day was going, whether the new organic cleaning products were really better than the old ones. Then slowly the conversations had deepened. She'd learned he was saving every penny to open his own motorcycle repair shop, that his mother had died of cancer 2 years earlier, leaving him with nothing but memories and a gold necklace, that he'd dropped out of UCLA's engineering program in his junior year to care for her, sacrificing his degree to make her final months comfortable. "Do you regret it?" Celeste had asked one night, finding him cleaning the pool deck under the stars. Ryan had paused, wringing out his mop. "Regret being there when she needed me? Never. Regret that the world measures a man's worth by his degree instead of his character? Every single day." She'd sat down right there on the wet deck, designer dress be damned. They'd talked until 3 in the morning, about his mother's love of old movies, about Celeste's lonely childhood in boarding schools, about the weight of expectations neither of them had asked for. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" she'd whispered as dawn began to break over the ocean. "Every day," he'd whispered back. Every single day. That night had changed everything. Their friendship had grown like a secret garden, hidden from her father's disapproval, from the hotel staff's gossip, from the society pages that would have crucified her for slumming it with the help. They'd meet after his shifts, talking for hours in the hotel's rooftop garden. He'd tell her about the motorcycles he was repairing, the dream shop he was planning. She'd tell him about the crushing responsibility of running a hotel empire she'd never asked for, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted her money, her name, her connections, everything except her actual self. Ryan had been different. He'd challenged her assumptions, pushed back on her privilege, made her laugh at herself. When she'd complained about a difficult business decision, he'd said, "You know what I did when I had a difficult decision this week? I chose between paying my electric bill and buying new brake pads for my Harley." Perspective, Celeste. She'd been furious. Then she'd thought about it. Then she'd realized he was right. "Teach me," she'd said the next time she saw him. "Teach you what?" "To see the world the way you do, to find meaning in the small things, to be happy with less." He'd smiled, that slow, devastating smile. "I'll teach you about motorcycles if you teach me about wine that costs more than my monthly rent." They'd both laughed, but the teaching had been real. He'd brought her to his tiny apartment in Santa Monica, shown her his workshop in the garage, a converted space filled with motorcycle parts and tools he'd collected over years. His blue Harley-Davidson sat in the center, gleaming despite its age. "This was my mother's gift to me," he'd said, running his hand over the chrome. "She saved for 3 years to buy it. Said every man needs something that makes him feel free." "What makes you feel free, Ryan?" Celeste had asked. He'd looked at her for a long moment. "Lately? These conversations with you." The admission had hung between them like a living thing. She'd started showing up at his workshop on weekends, watching him work. He'd teach her about engines, about the satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. She'd arrive in her designer clothes and leave with grease under her fingernails, and somehow that felt more real than any charity gala she'd ever attended. One Saturday she'd asked, "Can you teach me to ride?" Ryan had looked genuinely surprised. "Your father would have a heart attack." "My father isn't invited." He taught her on empty roads along the coast, his arms around her as she learned to balance, his voice patient in her ear through the helmet speaker. "Feel the machine, Celeste. Trust it. Trust yourself." When she'd finally ridden solo for the first time, the wind in her hair and the ocean beside her, she'd felt truly free for the first time in her life. They'd stopped at a beach overlook, both of them wind-blown and grinning. Ryan had looked at her with something in his eyes she'd been afraid to name. "You're different when you're away from that hotel," he'd said quietly. "Better? Real?" She'd kissed him then, just leaned over and kissed him, all her careful control dissolving like sugar in rain. He'd kissed her back, his hands gentle on her face, and for a moment everything else had fallen away. The class differences, the complications, the impossibility of it all. When they'd pulled apart, reality had crashed back in. "Celeste," he'd said, his voice rough. "We can't." "Why not?" "Because you're you and I'm me. Because your world and my world don't mix. Because I can't be your rebellion and you can't be my rescue. We both deserve more than that." But they'd kept meeting anyway. Secret dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants where no one knew her name. Long rides up the coast. Stolen kisses in his workshop while rain drummed on the roof. For 6 months she'd been happier than she'd ever been. For 6 months she'd believed love might actually be enough. Then her father had found out. Charles Davenport had been a force of nature in business, and he'd brought that same ruthless energy to destroying his daughter's inappropriate relationship. He'd called Ryan to his office, made an offer Celeste still didn't know the details of. Whatever he'd said, whatever he'd threatened, Ryan had come to her that night with devastation in his eyes. "I'm leaving, Celeste. Tomorrow. I've got a job offer in Seattle. Good pay, benefits, a chance to start fresh." "Seattle? Ryan, that's across the country practically. What about your shop? What about—" She'd stopped, unable to say us. "Your father made it clear I don't have a future here. Not if I stay near you." His jaw had tightened. "He's not entirely wrong. What kind of future could we have, really? You in your mansion, me in my garage apartment? You at board meetings, me cleaning toilets? Eventually you'd wake up and realize you'd given up too much. Eventually I'd wake up bitter and resentful. The poor boyfriend who couldn't provide the life you're used to. I won't do that to either of us." "You don't get to decide that," she'd said, fury and desperation mixing in her voice. "You don't get to decide what I'm willing to give up. Someone has to think clearly, and you're too busy playing Cinderella in reverse to see the truth." His words had been harsh, but his eyes had been gentle, sad. "I love you, Celeste. God help me, I do. But I love you enough to let you have the life you were meant for. And I love myself enough to build a life where I'm not just the help who got lucky." She'd slapped him, hard. Then she'd dissolved into tears, and he'd held her while she sobbed against his blue uniform, knowing it was goodbye. Before he'd left, he'd unclasped the necklace he always wore. His mother's necklace, the delicate gold chain with a tiny pendant shaped like a bird in flight. "My mother told me this would bring me to my freedom one day," he'd said, placing it in Celeste's palm. "But my freedom isn't out there in Seattle, it's here with you. And since I can't have it, I want you to keep this. Remember that someone saw you for who you really are. Not the Davenport name, not the hotel fortune. Just you, Celeste, the woman who learned to ride a motorcycle and got grease in her hair and laughed like she'd never been allowed to laugh before." He'd kissed her forehead, gentle as a prayer. Then he'd walked out of the Melbrook Hotel and out of her life. That had been 3 years ago. Celeste had thrown herself into the business with a vengeance. She'd expanded the hotel chain, opened 2 new properties, increased profits by 40%. She'd dated a few men, appropriate men from appropriate families, but none of them had ever made her feel the way Ryan did. None of them had ever challenged her, pushed her, seen her. She'd worn his mother's necklace every single day, through board meetings and business trips, through lonely nights in her mansion and forced smiles at charity events, through the slow, painful process of accepting that some loves weren't meant to last, no matter how real they felt. And now, here she was on a Malibu beach at sunset, still wearing that necklace, still unable to let go. "Excuse me, miss. You dropped this." The voice hit her like a physical blow. Deep, familiar, impossible. Celeste turned slowly, her heart in her throat. Ryan Walker stood 5 feet away, holding her blue shoe. She must have stepped out of it without realizing. He wore jeans and a faded t-shirt instead of his blue uniform, his hair a bit longer than she remembered, sun-bleached at the tips. His arms were more muscular, probably from years of mechanic work. He looked good, healthy, happy even, and he was staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. "Celeste?" His voice was barely a whisper. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only watch as his eyes traveled down to the necklace at her throat, his mother's necklace catching the last rays of sunlight. His expression shattered into something she couldn't read. Pain, disbelief, longing. "You kept it," he said, the words rough. "All this time, you kept it." "I never took it off," she managed. "Not once." They stood there on the beach, the ocean wind swirling around them, 3 years of silence and longing between them. Celeste's mind was racing. What was he doing here? Did he live in Malibu now? Was he just visiting? Was he alone, or— "Hello, my friend. How was your day today? Is everything okay?" Ryan asked softly, and despite everything, the pain, the time, the impossibility of this moment, Celeste felt herself smile at the gentle greeting. So typically him. "It's better now," she whispered. "Much better now." His hand was still extended, holding her shoe like it was made of glass. She took a step toward him, then another, until she was close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to smell the familiar scent of motor oil and soap that she'd never forgotten. "What are you doing here, Ryan? I thought you were in Seattle." I was, for 2 years, then I moved back 6 months ago. I opened a motorcycle shop in Marina del Rey. It's small, but it's mine. He paused. I come to this beach sometimes. To think. To remember. I never thought I'd actually. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Never thought you'd actually see me? Celeste finished for him. Never thought I'd see you still wearing that necklace, he corrected. I figured you'd have thrown it away by now, moved on, found someone worthy of you. Worthy of me? The words came out sharper than she intended. Ryan, you were the only person who ever made me feel worthy. Everyone else just saw the Davenport name and dollar signs. You saw me. I still see you, he said quietly. I never stopped seeing you. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and fierce. Celeste reached up to touch the necklace, her fingers trembling. Why did you really leave, Ryan? And don't give me the speech about different worlds and impossible futures. What did my father say to you? Ryan's jaw tightened. Celeste, tell me, please. I've spent 3 years wondering. I deserve to know. He looked out at the ocean, the muscle in his jaw working. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. He offered me $200,000 to disappear from your life. Said if I really cared about you, I'd take the money and use it to build something for myself, far away from his daughter. Said if I refused, he'd make sure I never worked in California again. He'd destroy any business I tried to start, blacklist me from every shop and garage in the state. Celeste felt cold despite the warm evening air. And you took the money? Hell no. Ryan's eyes snapped to hers, fierce. I told him to shove his money straight up his... He stopped, smiled grimly. Well, I wasn't polite about it. But then he said something that got to me. He said, she's going to wake up one day and resent you. Not today, not tomorrow, but 5 years from now when she realizes she gave up galas for garage sales, boardrooms for tool rooms. She'll look at you and wonder what her life could have been. And you'll see it in her eyes. And it will destroy you both. He had no right. He was right, though, wasn't he? Ryan's voice was gentle but firm. Be honest, Celeste. Could you really have been happy long-term? You, with your Ivy League education and your designer everything? Married to a guy who works with his hands and comes home smelling like motor oil? Your friends would have whispered. Your business associates would have questioned your judgment. And yeah, maybe you would have been fine with it at first, caught up in the romance of it all, but eventually, you're wrong. Celeste's voice was steady now, certain. You're absolutely wrong. And you know how I know? Because I've spent 3 years living the life I was supposed to live. Dating the right men, attending the right events, being the perfect Davenport heiress. And every single day I felt like I was suffocating. Every single day I put on this necklace and remembered what it felt like to be real with someone. To be seen. To be free. She stepped closer, close enough to see the battle raging in his eyes. I don't need you to protect me from my own choices, Ryan. I needed you to trust that I knew my own heart. That I knew what I was willing to sacrifice. That I was strong enough to handle the whispers and the judgment. And now? Ryan's voice was barely audible. 3 years later, what do you need now? Celeste took a breath. I need to know if you're happy. If Seattle and then Marina del Rey gave you what you were looking for. If there's someone... She couldn't finish the question. There's no one, Ryan said immediately. I tried. Dated a few women. Nice women. Normal women without hotel empires and complicated fathers. But none of them were you. None of them challenged me or frustrated me or made me want to be better. None of them looked at my grease-stained hands and saw capability instead of limitation. Hope fluttered in Celeste's chest, dangerous and bright. Your shop in Marina del Rey, she said carefully. Is it everything you hoped it would be? A genuine smile crossed Ryan's face. It's better. I've got 3 mechanics working for me now. We specialize in vintage bikes. I've built something I'm proud of, Celeste. Something that's mine, that I created without anyone's help or handouts. I'm so glad, she said, and meant it. You deserve that. You deserve to build your dream. What about you? Ryan's eyes searched hers. Did you find what you were looking for? Celeste laughed, but it came out sad. I found out that success is hollow when you have no one to share it with. That a mansion is just a big empty house when you're alone in it. That no amount of business expansion or profit margins can fill the hole that one person leaves behind. Celeste, I'm not trying to guilt you, she said quickly. I want you to know that you were right about one thing. I did wake up and realize what I'd given up. But it wasn't the future I gave up with you, Ryan, it was you yourself. The conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being completely, utterly known by another person. That's what I gave up, and I've regretted it every single day. Ryan closed his eyes, his expression pained. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I wrote you letters, he said, dozens of them, never sent a single one. What would I say? Sorry I left, but I'm still not good enough for you. Sorry I broke both our hearts, but I stand by my decision. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. You could have said you missed me, Celeste whispered. You could have said you still thought about me. You could have said that maybe, just maybe, we made a mistake. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Around them, the beach was emptying as evening approached. Soon they'd be alone with the ocean and the gathering darkness. Ryan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the necklace at her throat. His fingers brushed her collarbone, and Celeste shivered. My mother used to tell me this necklace was magic, he said softly, that it had been in her family for 3 generations, and every woman who wore it found her way home eventually. I never believed in magic before, but he looked at her, really looked at her, and Celeste felt stripped bare. But here you are, still wearing it, still waiting. I wasn't waiting, Celeste said, but even she could hear the lie in it. Ryan smiled sadly. Weren't you? Yes, her heart screamed. Yes, I've been waiting. Every day, every night, every moment. What do we do now? She asked instead. I don't know, Ryan admitted. The problems that existed 3 years ago, they're still there, Celeste. I'm still a mechanic. You're still a billionaire heiress. Your father still hates me. The world still doesn't understand why someone like you would choose someone like me. I don't care what the world understands, Celeste said fiercely. I care about what I understand. And I understand that I have never been as happy as I was when I was with you. I understand that no amount of appropriate boyfriends or successful business deals has filled the space you left. I understand that I am 24 years old, and I am tired of living my life according to other people's expectations. She grabbed his hand, pressing it against her heart. I understand that my heart still beats faster when I look at you, that 3 years apart didn't change anything except making me more certain, more sure, more willing to fight for this. Ryan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. And if I'm still not sure? If I'm still scared that I'll wake up one day and you'll resent the choice you made? Then we figure it out together, Celeste said. That's what people who love each other do, Ryan. They face the hard things together. They trust each other. They build a life that works for both of them, not for society or family expectations or anyone else. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. She squeezed his hand. Do you still love me? The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Ryan's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they were full of everything she needed to see. I never stopped, he said, his voice breaking. God help me, Celeste. I never stopped. Not for a single day. Not for a single hour. You've been in my head, in my heart, in every motorcycle I've fixed and every sunset I've watched. I've compared every woman to you and found them all wanting. I've built a life I'm proud of, but there's still a hole in it shaped exactly like you. Celeste felt tears streaming down her face. Then why are we still talking about obstacles instead of solutions? Why are we standing here listing reasons it won't work instead of reasons it will? Because I'm terrified, Ryan admitted. I'm terrified of failing you, of not being enough, of waking up and seeing disappointment in your eyes. I'm terrified that loving you isn't enough to bridge the gap between who I am and who your world expects you to be with. My world can go to hell, Celeste said fiercely. I didn't choose this life, Ryan. I inherited it. The hotel, the money, the expectations, none of it was my choice. But you? Choosing you would be my choice. Fighting for us would be my choice. Building something real and honest and true would be my choice. And that terrifies me too. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and miserable without you. Ryan pulled her close then. So suddenly she gasped. His arms came around her, strong and familiar, and Celeste buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent she'd missed so desperately. I've got motor oil on my shirt, he murmured into her hair. It's probably getting on your fancy blazer. I don't care. Her words were muffled against him. I don't care about any of that. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, 2 people who'd spent 3 years apart learning exactly how much they meant to each other. The ocean rolled in and out, patient and eternal, while Celeste felt the pieces of her broken heart slowly beginning to knit back together. Finally, Ryan pulled back just enough to look at her face. His thumb brushed away her tears, gentle as always. If we do this, he said carefully, we do it right this time. No hiding, no sneaking around. If we're together, we're together. Out in the open. I won't be your secret, Celeste. I won't be the thing you keep hidden in the shadows. I don't want you hidden, she said immediately. I never wanted that. That was my father's requirement. Not mine. The next evening, Celeste stood on the steps of her Malibu mansion, her heart pounding like a teenager on her first date. She wore the royal blue blazer and denim shorts, her fine blue shoes catching the last rays of sunlight, and around her neck, as promised, gleamed the gold necklace Ryan had given her 3 years ago. The rumble of a motorcycle engine echoed up the driveway, and there he was, Ryan Walker on his blue Harley-Davidson, looking like every forbidden fantasy she'd ever had. He pulled up to the front entrance, removed his helmet, and smiled at her with such warmth that Celeste felt her knees weaken. "You wore it," he said, his eyes on the necklace. "I told you I would." She walked down the steps, feeling powerful and vulnerable all at once. "I've worn it every day for 3 years, Ryan. Why would I stop now?" He helped her onto the bike, his hands gentle on her waist. When she wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, Celeste felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This was home. They rode up the Pacific Coast Highway as the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors. Ryan took her to a small Italian restaurant in Marina del Rey. Nothing fancy, but the kind of place where the food was made with love and the owner knew everyone's name. "Ryan," an elderly man with a thick Italian accent emerged from the kitchen, arms spread wide. "You finally bring the beautiful woman you talk about all the time." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "You talk about me?" Ryan had the grace to look embarrassed. "I may have mentioned you once or twice. Once or twice every day," the owner corrected with a wink. "This boy, he comes in every week, orders the same thing, sits alone and stares at a picture on his phone. Always the same picture. A woman with blonde hair on a motorcycle laughing like she owns the world." Celeste felt tears prick her eyes. "You kept my picture?" "I kept everything," Ryan admitted quietly. "Every memory, every moment. I tried to move on, tried to forget, but you were always there, in every sunset, in every woman's laugh that wasn't quite right, in every dream I had about a future I'd given up on." Over pasta and wine, they talked about the 3 years apart. Ryan told her about Seattle, the loneliness, the realization that running away solved nothing. About coming back 6 months ago, opening his shop, building a life he was proud of, but that still felt incomplete. "Why didn't you contact me?" Celeste asked. Ryan's expression was pained. "Because I was terrified. What if you'd moved on? What if that necklace was forgotten?" He touched it gently. "I couldn't handle the thought of you not caring anymore." "But you came to that beach," Celeste pointed out. "Every weekend," Ryan admitted, "hoping I'd run into you, hoping the universe would give us another chance." He smiled ruefully. "I guess it finally did." After dinner, Ryan took her to his shop. It was small but impeccably organized, a mirror of the man himself. 3 mechanics were still working despite the late hour, and they all looked up with interest when Ryan walked in with Celeste. "Guys, this is Celeste," Ryan said, and there was such pride in his voice that Celeste's heart swelled. "Celeste, this is Marcus, Jake, and Tony. They keep this place running." "The famous Celeste," Marcus said with a grin. "We've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Celeste said. "The boss doesn't shut up about you," Jake added. "It's honestly kind of sad." "Was sad," Ryan corrected, pulling Celeste close. "Not anymore." He showed her around the shop, explaining his business model, his future plans. There was a back office where he'd sketched out designs for expansion, maybe a second location, maybe that training program for underprivileged kids he'd always dreamed about. "This is incredible, Ryan," Celeste said, meaning it. "You built all this yourself?" "With a lot of help and a lot of mistakes," Ryan said. "But yeah, it's mine. It's small, but it's real." "It's perfect," Celeste said firmly. "It's exactly what you dreamed of." They sat in his office after the mechanics left, sharing a beer and talking about the future. The hard conversation neither of them wanted to have, but both knew was necessary. "Your father is going to lose his mind when he finds out we're together again," Ryan said finally. "Let him," Celeste said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm not 21 anymore, Ryan. I'm not going to let him bully us apart a second time. He'll try to destroy my business. Then I'll use every resource I have to protect it." Celeste took his hand. "I've spent 3 years learning how to be ruthless in business, Ryan. If my father comes after you, he'll find out I'm more of a Davenport than he ever gave me credit for." Ryan studied her face for a long moment. "You've changed. For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better." He kissed her softly. "You've always been strong, Celeste. But now you know it. Now you own it." They made a plan that night. No more hiding, no more shame. They would face the world together, and if society didn't approve, that was society's problem, not theirs. The confrontation with Charles Davenport came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Celeste invited her father to lunch at the hotel, her hotel, and told him straight out that she and Ryan were together again. Charles's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. After everything I did to separate you from that man, you're throwing yourself back into the gutter? His name is Ryan Walker, Celeste said calmly. He owns a successful motorcycle repair business. He employs 3 people. He's respected in his community. And most importantly, he loves me for who I am, not for what I can do for him. He's a janitor. He was a janitor. Now he's a business owner. But even if he was still cleaning floors, he'd still be worth 10 of the men you've tried to set me up with. Celeste leaned forward. I'm 24 years old, Dad. I own this hotel outright. I've increased profits by 40% in 3 years. I've proven I can succeed without your approval. And I'm going to be with Ryan whether you like it or not. I can make things very difficult for him. Charles threatened. You can try, Celeste said, her voice hard. But I have lawyers too. And unlike 3 years ago, I'm prepared to use them. If you come after Ryan's business, I will fight you with everything I have. And trust me, Dad, I learned from the best. You taught me to be ruthless. Don't be surprised when I use those lessons against you. Charles stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. You've changed. I grew up, Celeste corrected. I learned that your approval isn't worth sacrificing my happiness. I learned that love matters more than reputation. And I learned that I'm strong enough to stand on my own, with or without the Davenport family blessing. Her father stood, his face tight with anger. If you do this, Celeste, don't expect me to be there when it all falls apart. I won't need you to be, Celeste said quietly. I have Ryan, and that's enough. Charles walked out without another word. Celeste sat alone at the table, her hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. She'd done it. She'd finally stood up to her father, and the world hadn't ended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. How'd it go? She smiled and typed back. I chose us, and I'd do it again 1,000 times. 3 months later, Celeste and Ryan rode up the coast on his blue Harley, the ocean sparkling beside them, the future bright and open ahead. They'd face down her father's disapproval, society's judgment, and their own fears, and they'd come out stronger. Ryan pulled over at a cliff overlook, the same spot where Celeste had learned to ride 3 years ago. He removed his helmet and helped her off the bike, then took both her hands in his. I have something to say, he began, and Celeste's heart started racing. Ryan, let me get this out before I lose my nerve. He took a deep breath. 3 years ago I left because I was scared. Scared of not being enough. Scared of you waking up one day and regretting choosing me. Scared of failing you. But these past 3 months have taught me something important. He reached up to touch the necklace at her throat. His mother's necklace, the symbol of freedom and home. My mother told me this necklace would bring me to my freedom. And she was right. But freedom isn't about being alone. It's not about running away from hard things or protecting yourself from possible pain. Freedom is about choosing the life you want, the person you want, and having the courage to fight for it. Ryan pulled a small box from his pocket, and Celeste's breath caught. You fought for us when I was too scared to. You wore this necklace every day as a promise, a hope, a belief that love was worth waiting for. And now I want to fight for us too. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Celeste Davenport, will you marry me? Will you let me spend forever showing you that love really can bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, defy any expectation? Celeste was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. Yes, God, yes, 1,000 times yes. Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger and they kissed as the sun set over the Pacific, 2 people from different worlds who'd found their way to each other against all odds. I love you, Celeste whispered against his lips. I never stopped. I love you too, Ryan whispered back. My freedom, my home, my everything. They stood there on that cliff, the ocean wind in their hair and the world spread out before them, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be judgment and difficulty and moments of doubt, but they would face it together, with love and courage and the kind of faith that moves mountains. Because some loves are worth fighting for. Some connections transcend class and circumstance and society's expectations, and some people, when they find each other, discover that together they can build something more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. As they rode back down the coast toward home, their home now, a small apartment above Ryan's shop where grease stains and designer clothes lived side by side in perfect harmony, Celeste touched the gold necklace at her throat and smiled. Freedom, Ryan's mother had promised. And she'd been right. But the freedom wasn't in the running or the hiding or the protecting. The freedom was in the choosing, in the loving, in the courage to say yes to something real even when the world said no. And that freedom, Celeste thought as Ryan's arms held her steady on the bike, was worth everything.